health and education. 39 million people every year in India go into debt because of health. 39 million people. Had it not been for health reasons, India's poverty figures, even by the most charitable estimates, which is the government of India, you can't be more charitable than that, would be 3% less. 71% of ill people in our country go to private doctors. The private doctors aren't the best in the world. In India, we know they're terrible. As many as 27% of India's sick do not seek medical help because they don't have the money. This is the Indian Human Development Survey. Now, if this is the situation, then what do you think will happen? You will encourage a patron-client relationship. Now, the thing that worries poor people the most is if somebody falls sick, how will they look after that person? So they reach out for patrons. Education, same thing again. You and I reach out for patrons. To send our children to school, reach out to patrons. To get our mother to hospital, reach out to patrons. Because there's no universal health and universal education. I have been the beneficiary of universal health in another country. And I can tell you that I had no worries at all. I had to, my family and so on and so forth, this is a long story of course, but we had no worries at all because we didn't depend on any patron. And that I think is very important to establish a middle class society. A middle class society is not to be measured in terms of how many cars you have, how many fur coats you have. A middle class society is a society that is basically independent, made up of independent people. And this independence is missing because of health and education. And wherever universal health and education is put in place, in those societies, the middle class has leapt forward. So today you find most of Western societies are middle class simply because they have been nurtured at the early stages by universal health and universal education. And then you talk about the law, and Foreign Joy said that you see there's nobody to actually enforce the law, it doesn't work. You can enforce the law when patron-client relationships are not in question. There's no patron-client relationship, it doesn't really work. There's a very interesting joke, it's apocryphal in all likelihood, that to United Airways counter somebody came and he wanted his excess baggage to be checked, and she said no, and the girl at the counter, and then he said, do you know who I am? So the girl turns to public address system and says, is there a doctor somewhere here? There's a man here who doesn't know who he is. So you see, patron clients don't work in a situation where everybody is middle class. We flatter ourselves in saying that we are a middle class society, but believe me, we are not middle class. Even by consumption standards, only 3% of Indian households own cars.
Yes, please.
Sorry.
Hello, sir, my question is Professor Samuel. Sir, you talked about cynicism and like people feeling nothing is going to work out. But in a system where even when the rules are clearly defined and you at a personal level keep practicing ethics, but others continue to shun it and take shortcuts or like still like if you are the person who is stopping at a red light at 1 a.m. and you are called a fool, so like how long can you practice ethics and still not be cynical about it?
No, these are not easy things to do. I'm saying that that's a type of transformation we need to achieve. And today, I didn't have time to go into it, some of the mass movements we are seeing, fighting against corruption, standing up, going to Freedom Park, I would see it as seeding of this kind of hope. Although individually we are not able to achieve what you are talking about, and we could be discouraged and we may give up. Those movements and the collective action we think we are doing can instill some hope. We need to have such mechanisms. I use the term promoting demand-side governance. That is where we are powerless individually. By coming together, this is what many activists and others are doing. We create a little more sense of hope and movement. So yes, the problems you indicated are right. And the way to move forward is to work together in teams, in communities, in organizations, still striving for achieving the more ethical way of living, conduct, while we see the abuses all around us.
Okay, in the interest of time, excuse me, just a minute. In the interest of time, I'm going to request one thing. Let's just hear 4 or 5 questions, and then we'll take them and answer them together. So, sir, your question first, please.
My name is Prabhakaran. I am teaching ethics for a few years. I am surprisingly fine this year my students are more interested in ethics after the 2G spectrum. My question is, our politicians are giving a lot of freebies, maybe laptops or color televisions or some other forms of freebies. Now, are we promoting this kind of amoral and suggest to people that Indians by and large can become unethical? They don't make a distinction between immoral and amoral. After all, the government is doing like this. They are very much neutral. So I would very much like Professor Divankar to answer, because I have been recommending your book to students also. Thank you.
Dipankar, let me just take a few more questions and then we can answer them together. Yes, please. Can you just pass the mic around, please, quickly?
Good evening. Can I?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. I was a little confused about the subject. We start with the question mark, unethical India. And does the panel conclude that we are unethical? Number one. Because there's nowhere we have debated that there was nowhere a point that debates against this point that no, we are not unethical. Next point is about corruption. Is corruption the only unethical thing? Till Professor Gupta brought out that morality and ethics are to be treated separately. Okay, now morality is what we are, and ethics, from what I understand, is what we would like to be seen as, a perception, as per the rules defined. Now, my next point is ethics based on the scale? What I'm trying to say is that does it depend on the scale or the impact on an individual or a corporate or a country or a society in general?
Okay, I think we got the question. Next, can you just take?
Could I just?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Girish. This question is to each one of the panelists. Please try and answer either yes or no. Preference, not affirmation.
Yes,
In
yes.
India, in India, can one start a business enterprise? I'm not referring to a cutting-edge business enterprise. In India, can one start a business enterprise and run it for 2 years without paying a price, either directly or indirectly, either in cash or kind?
Okay, I think we got your question, sir.
With a reasonable output and a reasonable time.
Good. Professor Manohar,
Yeah. I was left wondering whether we were to see this as an evolutionary process. It will take 100 years, 50 years for our society to get better, or can we accelerate the evolution like in Singapore? If so, how? I see some points were made, in terms of transparency, in terms of shaming. Is there, and another thing is that an individual, a few bad apples are with a systemic in the body of the society, and therefore, how do you approach this?
Okay, yes, please.
A question for Professor Gupta. Is it a climb down to instrumentalize ethics? To say that ethics is it a climb down to instrumentalize ethics to say that ethics is justifiable and means to something rather than
Professor, he's been waiting for a
Yeah,
while.
please. Yeah.
There are 2 questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to a few questions being clarified here. I think Professor Gupta made a fantastic distinction between ethics and morals, as I understood it. It was kind of a aha moment for me. I just wanted to use an example to try and understand whether we're on the right track or not. When you talked about this external distinction and the internal, the morals is personal and ethics is external. Tiger Woods. Now here's a guy who was the epitome of everything he stood for in terms of affirmative opportunity, breaking through the glass ceiling, outstanding golfer, inspired millions of people, and then failed morally. But when he accepted his moral failure, he was allowed to come back and compete on an ethical platform, saying once again, welcome back to the sport, and like talk about sport, the rules being what they are, and so on. So does it mean that we could exist with this duality? That in my personal space, I could continue to be immoral, but as long as in my external space, I'm ethical, society will accept and allow such people to prosper. Because this leads on to your point about the kind of cooperation that people believe. And then how would you juxtapose this if you're proposing that we all become effective societies or middle class societies, and then you talk about middle class morality? How do you integrate these two factors?
Professor Jha?
2 questions. Anybody on the fence?
about education, and my hypothesis is most of the people whom we discussed today, or the names came, they were educated people. So education and lack of ethics, is it inversely proportional? The second issue I have is that in these kinds of institutions, when we talk about ethics and we try to practice it, we have a system of governance where you look at the chairman, you look at the board members. Some of the people are named but not seen. Then what business we have to look at others? You talked about practice, practice, practice. So why not practice begins from home, and why media and others are not highlighting who are the people who are put on the board for some of the institutions where we are supposed to maintain high standards. Thank you.
Okay, yes, I think we'll take just one or two more. Okay, yeah, you first and then we'll take this question. Then we'll have to stop there, yeah, please.
Yeah, my question is about how we are addressing this entire issue. It's more directed towards Paul and Professor. When we question an unethical Indian question mark, I'm going to come out with a very cliche question. Is there a common Indian identity? Because so far, how we associate ourselves, Indians associate ourselves as caste-based or community-based, something that's more on the cities. I'm a public policy student, so when I read about behavior of auto wallahs in particular cities, we associate a particular kind of behavior with a particular city. So even though it is good to have such general discussions about unethical Indians, do we need to dwell deeper into the fact that every city or a particular level, whatever our level of analysis is, are there deeper problems to be addressed? And probably the way we look at this problem or an opportunity should be completely different. So,
okay, I think we take the last question here. Yours, yeah, please. You don't have the mic, just stand up. That's fine.
My question is probably to Mr. Paranda. One of the things that Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam used to say is we are not good at bringing out good news. We are not bringing out good role models. Are we talking about unethical Indians because we've been exposed to more negative news than the good news? Or how would our media react to good examples of ethical behavior? So far we have not seen so.
Great. Okay, so now I think maybe I'll just give 2 or 3 minutes to each one of you to kind of take a stab at any one of these questions, and then we'll also kind of wrap up after that. So maybe I'll start with you, Professor Paul.
There are several questions and I won't address all of them. I'm sure others will address. One, on starting a business, I have a feeling you got some examples from some of our colleagues who spoke about it. I think we are seeing in technology areas, certain services, it's quite possible you can now start a business and manage practically without any bribes. I'm not in business, so I can't guarantee that. But I think you can see certain sectors, certain types of businesses where this may be easier to do than others. I thought the question raised on unethical Indian was a rhetorical one. It was not to derive a conclusion about 1.2 billion people and divide them whether 2/3 are unethical or any such. We have strong feelings about this subject now, for the reason all of us, several of you have commented. There is much greater awareness. Media is publicizing things, electronic media is playing a role that didn't exist 20 years ago. So it doesn't necessarily mean corruption or unethical behavior has suddenly increased multiple times. We don't know that. There is no data on this. But certainly awareness and concern about it because of the awareness and knowledge, why you're getting better response in your ethics class. All of these are related to that. That is happening. And to me, that's a very positive trend. It is from that awareness and realization and the collective action that might follow, at least in some groups and cities and among the more educated, that change might come about. I feel like one of you indicated, these are not going to be achieved overnight. And that's partly because of the diversity that you referred to in our country. You cannot talk about like an average American. What is an average Indian? It varies all over the place. There are highly poor people, very rich people, uneducated people, unhealthy people, religions vary. So all of these make the task of transformation more difficult, more time consuming. I think that's why I said we may have to think in terms of decades and generations and not create a euphoria that a Lokpal bill today or an act passed will solve our problems. Let me stop there. I'm sure other panelists talk about it.
I endorse what Professor Samuel Paul said. The only thing that you can generalize about India is that you cannot generalize about India. But I do certainly believe that the overwhelming majority of the people of this country, the 1.2 billion people of this country, are not only honest, they would like to remain honest. And it's unfortunate when they find that the honest person is considered to be a fool or handicapped. I am firmly of the view that the fish rots from the head. That it's important for the media and all of us to talk about corruption at the top. Those in positions of power and authority, the rich and the powerful and the influential. I am firmly of the view, sir, that when you look at the question that was raised over here, education and lack of ethics, there are some extremely educated people, extremely intelligent people who are extremely corrupt. It's like arguing that a poor man is necessarily unintelligent. It's like a simplistic conclusion that one could draw. I think it's important for us to look at institutionalized forms of corruption. I think that's very, very important. I do believe that it is possible but extremely difficult, sometimes next to impossible, to start a business and run a business in India without paying bribes. I do believe that the reason why we are today debating this issue is because of the sheer scale and the brazenness of recent corrupt practices which have been highlighted. I mean, Bofors looks like small change today, 64 crores. I mean, who would have thought that it led to a prime minister, India's youngest ever prime minister, having to lose his job? And my last comments are about the media. In democracies across the world, good news is no news. Bad news is good news. Ask yourself as a consumer of the media why bad news attracts your attention far more than good news. And I sort of conclude with one of my favorite analogies, which I've sort of done to death. You know, there are dogs and dogs, and there are journalists and journalists. You've heard that one, you know, if dog bites man, it's not news. Only if man bites dog does it become news. Unless dog bites Sonia Gandhi or Michelle Obama. Remember, the media is supposed to be a watchdog of society, but you've heard of dogs whose bark is far worse than their bite. And you've heard of lap dogs. The lap dogs who are very, very comfortable on the laps of our netas, our babus, and our corporate captains. Spare a thought, sir, for the intelligent guide dog who helps a visually challenged man cross the road, or the sniffer dog who can sniff out explosive and drugs from a pile of luggage. There are dogs, and there are dogs, and there is the media, and there is the media.
Please.
There's one area that I wanted to comment on, which is about there is a huge amount of honesty, and frankly, when people are shown that there is an honest way to do things, an ethical way to do things, especially in a business, there is a moment of relief. Most of my colleagues, when I told them that this is a new ABC policy and this is what is expected as right practice and this is how it's going to be measured and this is how it's going to be monitored, there is this feeling of relief. I know. Maybe they were doing the right thing, but now they know that the right thing is very well laid down and it is documented and they know what they're going to be measured by. So my firm belief is that people, I mean, there are the hardcore ones, but most of the people want to be ethical. And if only as a leader we can show them the way, show them direction, give them the processes, and show them that it is possible to do things the right way, they will be more than eager to follow that. So that's my 2 cents again.
Yes, Deepankar, I think there were quite a few questions for you, so maybe we can just try to...
I just want to start where Meena ended. That is this, that it is true that most people do want to be honest. In fact, when I was the Ramlila grounds on 16th of August, for a few days, I met a large number of people who said that we are with Anna Hazare because we don't like ourselves for being corrupt. And they felt that they had been violated, they've done that to themselves, and they wish they were not corrupt or made to behave, like other corrupt people do. So there is a sense of realization. People do have a sense of what is justice deep down their hearts. I think everybody has it. Some people don't, perhaps, but by and large, that is why you have, as I said today, an ethical questioning of democracy, because we are now living with democracy and not just fighting for it. When you're doing ethics, somebody asked about business and bribery and so forth. It is a tough decision. It's not easy, but there are ways and ways of overcoming it. You cannot, as I told you earlier, lose your job, lose your business just because you want to be ethical. Ethics has to be a means to an end. It is not something on its own. It's a means to an end. So let us begin by putting forward a basic paradigm of ethical business practice. That is, you have certain principles, nepotism, not to bribe, or whatever it is, or raising the skill levels of your workforce. You have principles. The principles should have a straightforward policy that implements those principles. Alongside with that, what is the measurable effect? It has to be shown. Ethics has to be shown up front. Morality doesn't have to be shown that way. You feel it, you sense it, you like it, there's a euphoria about it. But ethics, you have to demonstrate every step of the way. It is out there in the open. And that is how you can make ethics part of your business. I must tell you, one of the companies, I'll give you the name, it is Aisha. I went up to one of the factories, and it was so surprising. So many of them told me, with a sense of pride, that they had lost a contract because they wouldn't budge. And they felt very good about it. I think that did a lot for the morale of the company, that they were able to stand by their principles, even though they lost their contract. I can imagine that must enthuse them so much, get all the red blood corpuscles going really fast, and in future, they'll probably work much harder for the benefit and prestige of the company. Education and ethics, it is not just education as education. I said universal education, what I was talking about was how to take the patronage element out of health and education. It is true that education is not always, doesn't always bring out the best in a person. It makes a person skillful enough to enter jobs and make a living and so forth. But look at the amount of investment that people are making in education and how difficult it is to keep a big patron-client relationship. Because in 1980, education surveys showed that 2% of Indian kids went to private schools. The 2011 survey says 21% of rural children and 52% of urban children go to private schools. So think of the kind of investment poor parents are making for their children. They're tightening the belt, nothing remains but the buckle really. Okay, that's how much emphasis they're putting in education, hoping that they'll be able to break free from the patron-client relationship, which is why I think that politicians are raking it in, because they are democratically elected patrons. And that is the problem. They don't represent us, they are our patrons. And what is a patron? Patron is a patron only when that person can break the rules and do things for you. If the patron stands in line with you and swats flies with you, that's not good enough. He has to be able to break the line to get you there, to break the law. So patron-client relationships are basically unethical at the start. Nothing ethical about it. And therefore, wherever you see it, distrust it. Now, Tiger Woods' case is an interesting one, because here you have what I was mentioning to you earlier. We are all assailed by this dilemma. Dilemma is something which is a human condition. Animals don't have dilemmas. They do what they think should be done. But human beings have dilemmas. That's why we are humans, we work with symbols. The dilemma basically at this point is ethics versus morality. And we try to straddle both, and we try to make the best of it. But I say, and my view, that a modern society is a society that veers more towards ethics and less towards morality. That I would say is a hallmark of modernity. It cannot be completely ethical or completely moral. If it's completely moral, you've lost the game. Completely ethical, it can't happen. It's too good to be true. But if you lean in that direction, the more you lean, the better it is. Which is why I think America is more hypocritical than Europe is. And Europe, I don't think you would have had this problem. Dominic Strauss-Kahn in America and in France. There's two different continents altogether with different kinds of ethical and moral standards in place. More hypocrisy in one and less in the other. Somebody mentioned India's identity. With the ethical sentiment rather than a moral one, we'll have taken a step forward. Thank you.
With such rich contributions from all the panelists, I don't think I'm going to hazard a summing up. I think we had some very brilliant perspectives on the issues confronting us today. Clearly, as Professor Paul mentioned, the title, The Unethical Indian, was meant more to provoke than to make a statement on our country. But I think we certainly have a very big challenge. As Professor Manohar Reddy was mentioning, if you want to accelerate this process, if you want to move quickly away from the patron-client relationship, or you want to move more quickly into the more institutional kind of setting that Professor Paul mentioned, clearly fundamental to each one of our panelists. Once again, a warm word of thanks to all the panelists, Deepankar and Poranjay from all the way from Delhi to be with us just on this occasion. So thank you for being with us. And Meena and Professor Paul, sometimes braving Bangalore traffic is almost the same as coming from Delhi. So thank you for being here as well. Thank you.